The air was heavy with the hum of crickets and the faint flicker of porch lights along the cul-de-sac. It was one of those quiet nights when the whole neighborhood seemed to sleep. But Malik Johnson had just returned home from a late workout. He pulled his truck into the driveway, cut the engine, and stepped out. Stretching his shoulders, his breath forming a thin mist in the cool night air. His body moved with that unshakable calm that comes from years of training, measured, precise, deliberate. Malik wasn't just any man. He was special forces, the kind of soldier who had been forged in places most people only saw in news headlines. But tonight, he wasn't a soldier. He was just a young man trying to live peacefully in his own home. That peace didn't last long. From across the street, shadows shifted, stepping out from behind a car. A man in a cheap-looking tactical vest, with security patches plastered unevenly across it, strutted forward like he was walking onto a stage. A shiny fake badge hung from his chest, catching the glow of the street lamp. His eyes locked on Malik, cold and smug, his hand resting on the grip of the pistol holstered at his side. "You," the man barked, his voice unnecessarily loud, sharp, enough to cut through the quiet night. "What are you doing here?" Malik tilted his head, narrowing his eyes slightly. He had seen this type before, swaggering, insecure men puffing themselves up behind a weapon and a false sense of authority. The guy walked with the posture of someone who desperately wanted power but had never truly earned it. Malik had spent years watching men like this crumble in real combat zones. Here he was, dressed up like a toy soldier, trying to intimidate. A man who'd been in places he couldn't dream of. "This is my house," Malik said simply. His voice calm, steady, unflinching. The fake cop didn't like that. He took another step forward, puffing out his chest. "Don't get smart with me. I'm with the HOA security team. I've had complaints about people like you hanging around. Show me your ID right now." Malik's lips pressed into a thin line. He could already hear the falseness dripping from every word. HOA security team? He knew the HOA had a contract with a legitimate local patrol service for daytime checks. But this guy wasn't them. His badge looked like something ordered off the internet, and the patches were barely aligned. Still, the gun on his hip wasn't fake. And Malik's eyes never strayed too far from it. "You don't have any authority to ask me for ID, Malik," replied evenly. "You're not law enforcement. You need to back away from my property." That answer only seemed to fuel the imposter's ego. His hand dropped onto the pistol, not drawing it yet, but making sure Malik could see the gesture. His voice turned into a bark. "I'll ask you one last time, ID. Now, or things are going to get rough." From behind closed blinds, neighbors stirred. A couple of curtains shifted just enough for eyes and cell phone cameras to peek out. People had seen this playbook before, the fake HOA cops strutting around, trying to scare folks they didn't. Usually, they targeted people they assumed wouldn't fight back. Tonight, they had chosen the wrong man. Malik straightened his back, his height casting a long shadow across the driveway. His breathing slowed, the way it always did before he took control of a situation. He wasn't angry. He wasn't rattled. Years of discipline had taught him how to lock those feelings away. But his silence, his sheer composure was enough to make the imposter shift uncomfortably. "You've got 3 seconds to take your hand off that weapon," Malik said quietly, his voice dropping into the kind of low growl that only comes from a man who has been in life-or-death situations. 1. Fake cop scoffed, trying to mask his unease. Malik continued, his eyes never blinking, his tone steady, like he was reading a clock. The imposter's hand trembled slightly, though he tried to clench it tighter around the pistol grip. His eyes darted, realizing he was suddenly very visible. Neighbors were recording, the lights in windows glowing brighter. Calmness radiating from Malik wasn't that of a man bluffing. It was the presence of someone who had faced down much worse. 3. Malik finished. A thick silence followed, the imposter frozen in indecision. He expected fear, expected stuttering, pleading excuses. Instead, he was looking into eyes that held no fear, no hesitation, only the cold patience of a predator who had dealt with real enemies. The man puffed his chest again, trying to regain control. "You think you're tough? You think you can talk to me like that? I've dealt with guys like you before. I know your type." Malik's jaw tightened. But he didn't rise to the bait. He could have drawn one of the weapons strapped discreetly under his jacket in less than a second. He could have ended this standoff before the man blinked. But that wasn't who Malik was. Violence wasn't his first answer, unless it absolutely had to be. Instead, he took one slow step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the imposter's bravado crack. "Listen carefully," Malik said, his voice calm, commanding. "I've taken guns from trained insurgents in combat zones. I've stared down men who would kill without hesitation. And you? You're just a man playing dress-up with a fake badge. If you pull that weapon, you won't get the chance to regret it." The words landed like a hammer. The imposter's mask slipped, his bravado faltering as his mouth twitched, his breathing uneven. The neighbors behind their blinds were whispering. Now, their phones recording every second of this exchange. Everyone watching could feel it that power had shifted. The fake cop wasn't in control anymore. Malik, still calm, didn't need to reach for his own weapons yet. His body language spoke louder than anything else. His squared shoulders, his deliberate breathing, his piercing gaze, all of it broadcast the silent truth. He wasn't the one in danger here. The imposter licked his lips nervously, his hand twitching on the pistol. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, he realized he wasn't dealing with just some young black man he could bully in the dark. He was standing in front of someone far beyond his league, and Malik. He was just getting started. The fake cop's voice cracked the silence again. Louder this time, like he thought volume could cover the cracks forming in his confidence. "Don't test me, boy. I'll lock you up right now. You hear me?" His hand stayed close to the gun, but his eyes darted nervously to the shifting curtains, the faint glow of phones recording from porches. The whole street seemed awake now, though nobody dared come outside. They all knew what it meant to get involved with the HOA's little circle of wannabe enforcers. Malik didn't move back. Instead, he calmly stepped forward again, closing another sliver of space between them. The fake cop shifted on his feet like he'd just realized the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he thought. Malik's silence was unnerving, the kind that didn't belong to ordinary men. It belonged to professionals. It belonged to soldiers. His gaze was steady, as if he were calculating every angle, every possible reaction, every escape the imposter might try. "Let me explain something to you," Malik said finally, his voice low and firm. "You think pointing a gun makes you? The dangerous one here. It doesn't. It makes you reckless. I've disarmed men faster than you can blink. You're shaking, you're breathing hard, and you've already shown me your hand. You don't know what you're doing." The imposter scoffed, trying to recover the bravado slipping away. "I've had training," Malik cut him off sharply. "No, you've had YouTube videos and fantasies. Real training doesn't look like this." The weight of those words hung. Between them, Malik let the silence settle before he moved again. His hand slowly, deliberately went to the zipper of his jacket. Every neighbor watching held their breath. The fake cop's eyes went wide, his hand twitching closer to his weapon as Malik calmly unzipped and spread his jacket open. The air seemed to change in that moment. The tactical rig strapped across Malik's chest gleamed under the streetlight. Twin holstered sidearms, positioned with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to use them. A combat knife sheathed across his chest, extra magazines tucked neatly into the vest. And there, stitched over his heart, the unmistakable patch of his Special Forces unit. The imposter's mouth fell slightly open. His grip on his gun loosened instinctively, his eyes flicking to the weapons, to the patch, to the calm expression on Malik's face that said everything. This wasn't a man to bluff. This wasn't a man to corner. This was a man who had lived through hell and come back stronger. Neighbors behind glass gasped audibly. One whispered, "Oh my God," as though they'd just realized the man they thought was quiet and ordinary carried a story, far deeper than they ever imagined. Cameras zoomed in, trying to capture the full picture, the armed imposter now paling in comparison to the calm, disciplined soldier standing before him. "You're in way over your head," Malik said evenly, his voice steady as steel. "You came out here with a fake badge and a gun, thinking you'd intimidate me. but what you've done is point a weapon at a special forces operator on his own property. That's a line you can't uncross, fake cop stammered, his voice no longer steady. You think I'm scared of you just because you scared? Malik interrupted, his tone firm but not loud. You should be. Not because of what I'll do, but because of what you've already done. The cameras are watching. The neighbors are watching. Everything you've said and done tonight is being recorded. The only thing keeping you from being on the ground with your face in the pavement right now is the fact that I'm choosing restraint. For the first time, the imposter's gun hand visibly trembled. He pulled it slightly out of the holster, as though testing his own nerve, then hesitated. His eyes locked with Malik's, and in that silence, he saw something he'd never faced before. Not anger, not fear, but absolute control. Malik's calm was scarier than any shouted threat. Malik stepped forward again, now close enough that the air between them seemed charged with electricity. He lowered his voice so only the imposter could hear. You think this is a game? You think dressing up in a vest makes you a warrior? I've seen warriors. I've buried warriors. I promise you, you're nothing like them. The imposter's face drained of color. His lips quivered, his bravado completely gone. The neighbors could see a tooth. The power shift was complete. Malik wasn't the one cornered. He had been in control the whole time. You've got one option left, Malik said calmly, his voice carrying enough for the onlookers to hear. You put that gun on the ground and you sit on the curb until the real police show up. If you don't, this ends in a way you won't walk away from. The imposter blinked, his breathing ragged. His fingers twitched, then slowly, reluctantly. He lowered the gun back into the holster. Malik didn't move, his gaze never wavering. The imposter's knees buckled as he sank down onto the curb, his head in his hands, trying to hide his shaking hands from the cameras that recorded every second. The neighbors erupted into hushed conversations. Phones clicked. I can't believe this, another whispered. He's the real deal. Malik didn't bask in it. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat. He simply zipped his jacket back up, concealing his rig once more, and stood, watchful, silent, waiting. He had de-escalated without ever raising his own weapon. But his point had been made crystal clear. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, slicing through the night air. The imposter's head jerked up, panic flooding his face. As the reality of what was coming set in, Malik remained motionless, like a sentinel, as flashing red and blue lights painted the street. The neighbors stepped back, eager to see how this would play out. The squad cars rolled in, tires crunching against asphalt. Real officers stepped out, hands near their weapons, eyes darting between Malik and the imposter on the curb. Malik raised his hands slowly, showing he wasn't a threat, his calm demeanor unshaken. Evening. Officers, Malik said, his voice steady. This man pointed a gun at me on my property while claiming to be HOA security. I suggest you check his credentials. The imposter tried to stammer an explanation, but his words came out broken, panicked. No, I was just the officers turned their attention to him, demanding ID, demanding proof. All he had was the fake badge, the knockoff vest, and a trembling body that screamed guilt. The neighbors began stepping outside now, voices rising as they told the officers what they'd seen. Holding up phones filled with recordings, the imposter shrank further, realizing there was no escape. He had tried to play a part, to intimidate. To wield power, he never earned. But now stripped of his facade, he looked small, weak, and completely undone. Malik, meanwhile, stood tall, his presence steady and commanding without saying another word. His silence said everything that he wasn't the victim here. He was the man who had held the line and refused to be intimidated. He had faced down the imposter without breaking a sweat, proving with every breath who the real warrior was. And, as the officers cuffed the fake cop and hauled him to his feet, the neighbors realized they'd witnessed more than just a confrontation. They had seen what true control and discipline looked like. Malik wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. Didn't need to prove himself. The imposter had done all the proving. For him, the night air felt different now, heavier with the knowledge that things had changed. Malik zipped up his jacket again, nodded once to the officers, and without another word, turned back toward his truck. The neighbors watched him in awe, whispering about who he really was, their earlier assumptions dissolving like mist. Malik didn't look back. He didn't need to. The imposter was finished. The truth was undeniable. And Malik's silence carried more weight than any headline that would follow. The sirens faded into silence, leaving only the low murmur of neighbors. In the faint rustle of leaves in the night air, Malik stood there, still as stone, his eyes tracking the fake cop as the officers secured him in cuffs and guided him toward the waiting squad car. The imposter looked nothing like the strutting figure who had first confronted Malik minutes earlier. His chest was no longer puffed up. His shoulders sagged, and his face was a pale mask of shock and humiliation. The weight of his poor decisions pressed down on him with every step. His gun had been confiscated, his fake badge bagged as evidence, his reputation shredded before the very people he had once tried to intimidate. The officers exchanged clipped words with each other as they searched him, pulling out extra rounds, a stun baton, and even handcuffs that looked like they'd been bought from a novelty store. "Whole get-up is a joke," one officer muttered as he dropped the items into a plastic evidence bag. Another shook his head and said, "These wannabes think it's a game until they point a gun at the wrong man." Malik heard every word, but said nothing. He stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, his posture tall, his face unreadable. Inside, though, he felt the familiar tight coil of adrenaline begin to loosen. He had trained his entire life to manage his body's responses. In combat zones, to control fear, anger, even the instinct to fight. Now, here in a suburban neighborhood, those same skills had kept him from doing something rash. Could have disarmed the imposter the second the gun twitched. Could have taken him down in 3 precise moves and ended it before the neighbors had even noticed. But Malik had chosen restraint, disciplined, the very qualities that separated real warriors from reckless pretenders, as the imposter was stuffed into the back of the squad car. One of the officers approached Malik. He was a grizzled veteran himself, the kind whose uniform carried the quiet authority of years on the job. "Sir," he said respectfully, "can you walk me through what happened tonight?" Malik gave a short, precise account, no embellishments, no dramatics. "He approached me in my driveway, claimed to be HOA security. He demanded ID, put his hand on his gun, and threatened me when I didn't comply. He pointed the weapon. I didn't draw mine. I waited until you arrived." The officer nodded, scribbling into his notepad, though his eyes flicked toward Malik's jacket, as though he knew there was more beneath it. Malik caught the look and gave the man a brief nod. "Yes, I'm armed. Yes, it's legal. I'm a special forces operator. I'm home on leave." That revelation wasn't said with arrogance. It was said like a fact, one Malik had no need to parade. Still, it carried weight. The officer's eyebrows rose slightly, his pen pausing mid-scratch. "Special forces," he repeated quietly, almost to himself. He cleared his throat and said louder, "Understood. Thank you for your restraint. Things could have gone very differently." Malik gave no reply, just a curt nod. He wasn't here for gratitude, wasn't here to make a spectacle. He just wanted the night to end without another tragedy written into the headlines. Across the street, neighbors had come out onto porches now that the immediate danger was gone. They whispered among themselves, pointing toward Malik, their expressions full of something new, a mix of respect and disbelief. They had seen him around for months, polite, quiet, keeping to himself. Some had even looked at him with suspicion, whispering behind closed doors about that guy with the big truck. Now those same people were realizing they had never really known him at all. One older man finally stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. Mr. Johnson?" called from the sidewalk. Malik turned his head slightly. "I just want to say thank you for handling it the way you did. I don't think any of us realized." But his words trailed off, but the sentiment was clear. Malik gave him a small nod. "You don't need to thank me. Just be careful who you trust with authority." That simple line sank into everyone listening. It was a warning, but also a lesson about power, about responsibility, about what separates someone who plays at being strong from someone who truly carries strength. Meanwhile, the imposter sat hunched in the back of the squad car, his face buried in his hands. The reality of what had just unfolded was beginning to sink in. He had thought himself powerful. He had thought a fake badge and a holster gave him control. But now the weight of his failure pressed down on him as heavily as the steel cuffs biting into his wrists. He had been dismantled without a single punch thrown. Malik finally moved, walking toward his truck with that same calm, deliberate pace. The crowd parted for him as if instinctively recognizing that he was something different, someone forged in places beyond their understanding. He didn't bask in the attention. He didn't exchange handshakes or accept congratulations. He simply opened the driver's door, paused for a moment, and glanced back once more. His gaze swept over the neighbors, over the flashing lights, over the imposter who had thought himself in charge. Then he climbed inside and shut the door with quiet finality. The truck's engine rumbled to life, its low growl cutting through the murmur of voices. As Malik pulled out of the driveway, he left behind a street forever changed. The neighbors would talk for weeks about what they'd seen, about the night their quiet neighbor revealed himself as someone extraordinary. The officers would write their reports, noting not just the crime committed, but the incredible restraint shown by the man who could have ended it instantly. And the imposter, he would sit in a cell, replaying the humiliation over and over. Haunted by the moment he realized he had picked the wrong target, Malik drove off into the night, his face illuminated briefly by the passing streetlights. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel satisfaction. What he felt was clarity, the same clarity he'd felt in the field. The same knowledge that strength wasn't about how loud you shouted or how big your weapon looked. It was about discipline, control, the ability to protect without needing to destroy. And that was the lesson he left behind that night. Not through speeches, not through violence, but through presence, through action. It's through silence more powerful than any threat. By morning, the story had spread across the neighborhood, carried by whispers, texts, and shaky videos posted online. People would argue over details, over what was said, over how exactly Malik had stood so unshaken. But one thing was undeniable. The fake cop had been exposed. Malik had walked away unscathed, not just physically, but with his dignity, his authority, and his quiet power intact. The neighborhood would never look at him the same way again. And the imposter, wherever he ended up, would never forget the night he pointed a gun at a man who had stared down real enemies and lived to tell the tale. That night didn't just end in justice. It ended in revelation. For everyone who saw it, it was clear Malik Johnson wasn't someone to be underestimated. He was a soldier who had carried the weight of war and still chose peace. And that, more than anything else, was what made him unstoppable.